Due to maintenance work between Newcastle and Edinburgh, instead of my LNER train terminating at Edinburgh, it diverted from Newcastle to Carlisle, where I changed trains for Glasgow. I've never visited Carlisle. My good friend Mardy has moved to the area, where he is the proud father of 2 young boys, who he informs me have an aversion to soap, which he's not so proud of. The diversion added an hour to my journey, and I arrived at Central Station in pouring rain. Walking to my Ballater Street hotel, I heard an unseen bus with alarm blaring and a recorded message repeating, "This bus is under attack. Please dial 999, which sounded most dramatic. Apparently it's quite easy for a bus driver to catch the alarm with their leg by mistake and then struggle to deactivate the alarm. I popped into St Andrew's Cathedral to refresh my memory, and as I recall, like most Catholic churches, it's still too gaudy for my taste. In contrast, the water feature in the cloister garden, amongst mirrored plinths inscribed with scriptures and poems, was reserved and peaceful, in keeping with Italian architect Julia Kiering's intentions. Spike Milligan states in his book Piecework he boarded at 118 Sauchiehall Street while playing the Pavilion Theatre with the Bill Hall Trio in the mid-1940s. He describes the building as handsome stone built in 1850, and the landlady being a Mrs. O'Brien, whose husband was wont to become drunk and chase her with an axe. 118 may well have been handsome before being disfigured by render and paint. Render is the devil's work. The Bertie Crew Design Pavilion Theatre was opened in 1904, with a seating capacity of 1,449. I was much taken by the elegant Renfrew Street elevation frieze, vertical sign above the canopy, the dentil moulding, and nicely weathered mosaics. Every year I ask the King of Glasgow to organise a theatre shoot, and every year he ignores me. I'd read Rookhill Park offered pleasant views over the city. They don't please as much as the Queen's Park views over the city, however. The children's play area resembles a prison exercise yard, with corner watchtowers and security gate. I found Rookhill Park bland and feeling neglected, which is a shame, because the layout could lend itself to so much more. But Rookhill's greatest crime is not possessing a bandstand. Bandstands, like bay windows, are God's work. My plans went awry from here when I made a visit to the Royal Infirmary Accident and Emergency Department, which wasn't on my shoot list. I was triaged quickly and after various checks found myself on a ward being monitored. My bed was near the nursing station, and the high level of courtesy and politeness between the medical team gladdened my heart. Politeness is most important in my family. While growing up, you were beaten for being impolite, and then beaten again if you didn't say thank you for the first beating. I chatted to a student nurse looking after me. She was in her final year, and her placement on this ward entailed 3 unpaid shifts a week, beginning at 7:45 a.m. and ending at 8 p.m, and she accepted extra shifts if offered, which were paid, disproving Tarquin's claims that work will never catch on. During the conversation, she said last year the Royal Infirmary employed 50 student nurses from a pool of 450. My memory of the exact figure may be a little out, but will be close to those mentioned. Asked what area she wished to work in when qualified, she replied a hospice. I questioned how she would cope with the sadness of such a role, but she said she didn't see it that way, continuing it was a privilege to spend time with patients in their last days. I was most impressed with this reply and her work ethic, and hope the infirmary offer her a job when qualified. Being discharged, Dr. Gemma said I should see my doctors at home, adding she would refresh herself on my condition as she hadn't encountered anyone with it before. I didn't realise Art Gallery Ponce was a recognised condition. Mother would have been so proud. During my 5-hour stay, all the staff were kind and lovely. It was most appreciated. Thank you very much. I'd been in contact with the King of Glasgow concerning my health since I arrived, and as usual, he was Glasgow's kindest man, checking on me and offering lifts to and from hospital and asking if I wanted him to accompany me. It's hard to praise his kindness enough. On the way back from the hospital, my condition now stabilised, I picked up a Sainsbury's meal deal, but scanning my Nectar card didn't reduce the price. I requested help from an assistant, who explained Sainsbury's Local don't offer meal deal discounts. Only full-fat Sainsbury's supermarkets do. He continued, not many people realise this. Yes, and I was one of them. That evening I called in the Scotia bar for a glass of lemonade, and for the first time in 3 visits didn't have someone sit next to me who, shall we say, had questionable personal hygiene. Unlike the shiny St Andrew's Cathedral, Glasgow Cathedral is a sedate, proper church with pews. A church without pews is the devil's work. Mind you, pews are the devil's work too, being the most uncomfortable seats known to man. But my goodness, they look good, especially box pews. I'm quite happy sitting in churches, mesmerised by awe at the ingenuity of their construction. Unfortunately, Glasgow Cathedral was busy with tour groups spoiling my reverence, so I headed for the jewel that is the necropolis. The necropolis was covered in the 2019 video, Glasgow Wandering 3, and I never tire of visiting it. The traditional preserved in aspic Criterion Cafe on Gallowgate, which has been closed for some time, has now become the bright and shiny Savannah, with a more modern and frankly bewildering in-length menu than its Criterion incarnation. Remaining with food, Greggs seems to be trendy and popular with the kids. Being neither a kid nor trendy, I've not partaken since before they took over Baker's Oven, when a Cornish pasty would occasionally be purchased to assist with a hangover. I stumbled upon this Greggs outlet. A quick search revealed Greggs outlets sell food at cheaper prices to those from disadvantaged areas. This outlet was situated on Crown Street, which didn't look particularly disadvantaged to me, so I asked the King, who offered that there are nearby struggling areas, but Crown Street is up and coming. And it was to meet the King I went next, pausing to tweet a picture of the essential items in an Art Gallery Ponce's hotel room: aloe vera gel, nectarines, and decaf tea bags. The King and I met at Bar 91 on Candle Rigs, which sounded suspiciously Poncy to me, but there's no chance he'd meet me in the Scotia. It turned out Bar 91 isn't Poncy. It follows the 1990s trend for pubs to look like industrial units, all bare brick and prominent ducting, but not Poncy. The barman was a young man with bad 80s footballer mullet and moustache, a look I'd seen quite often the last few days. Perhaps the mullet and moustache are ironic. One never can tell with hipsters. We were meeting to plan tomorrow's shoot. There's little planning at these meets, we just chat away amiably and then eventually decide on shoot details the next morning by text. But today I was determined to be organised. Well, after 4.5 hours, a pub, an art gallery and a coffee shop with extremely rude staff, we still hadn't finalised a plan, and we made our separate ways until the morning. This channel is a shambles. My evening stroll took me past the Avalon on Kent Road, which was closed on my last visit and has now reopened as the Maverick. Instead of the Maverick, I partook my evening glass of lemonade in McSorley's, where they presented the glass with a straw. Real men eschew straws. To confound my indignity, dreadful country music was being played on the sound system. Walking back to the hotel from McSorley's, two young ladies with cowboy hats informed me they'd attended a concert at the O2 Academy on Eglinton Street by country singer Riley Green. Can't say I've heard of him. The King decided my suggestion of a trip to Galashiels was acceptable and picked me up at 9:45 a.m. Just outside Edinburgh, we passed the terracotta-coloured Green Dykes Bing spoil heap, giving the impression one was in an exotic African terrain. Consisting of tiny shale flakes exhausted of their commercially extracted oil content in the mid-1800s, the Bings, once considered eyesores, have become havens for fauna and flora. My mentor, Mr. S, made an excellent 2016 film for the BBC exploring the shale industry, titled Scotland's First Oil Rush. The Netherdale Stadium, home of Gallifreydine Rovers, was our first destination. More specifically, the Peter Womersley designed Brutalist main stand, populated for the first time on November the 21st, 1964 for Gallifreydine's 4-2 win over East Fife. Gala engaged Womersley to design the stand in 1962 with a budget of £25,000. My good friend Mardy, mentioned earlier, worked on the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium construction, which cost £1 billion. Probably because some workers were clocking on, climbing through a toilet window and going home, returning at the end of their shift through said toilet window to clock off and receive a day's pay for no work. Back to Gallifreydine. The stand's striking appearance is due to its triangular geometry. The cantilevered roof, supported by 4 tapered piers, allows an unhindered view of the pitch, an impression the roof is floating. The simple, clean, angular concrete construction is a thing of beauty, and I can envision the stand situated in Eastern Europe, with spectators, beer in hand, an exotic snack contained in a white paper sweet bag of the 1970s in their lap, watching the football. Beauty is high maintenance though, and after 50 years of neglect, the stand was closed in 2018 for safety reasons. The stand is Category A listed and in theory protected. Now, listed buildings in Glasgow mysteriously go on fire regularly, but Womersley's vision was not to suffer that fate. A sympathetic £1.45 million refurbishment was undertaken, completed in October 2022. The stand was stripped of accretions such as signs, aerials and roof floodlight, returning the stand to its stark original intention. Frameless glazing on the side and rear was returned, having been removed and replaced with hoardings over time. And probably the most important part of the restoration was installing a liquid resin membrane to cover the previously unprotected concrete roof. This stand is high art, ranking along any sculpture, and was a privilege to behold. The King had seemed suspiciously amenable to visiting Gallifreydine Rovers, and the nearby aero leather clothing was the reason. He wished to purchase a new leather jacket. Situated in an old mill on Huddersfield Street, Galashiels, the 1981 Open Company specialises in horsehide jackets. Jacket construction has to be experienced. Each one's weight would probably exceed Ryanair's baggage limit. I've never encountered such heavy jackets. You feel they deflect anything directed at them. A single machinist constructs the whole jacket, which is signed with their name tag sewn into the lining. These are quality jackets made to last. Shop visits are by appointment, but the King was a returning customer, and they graciously allowed us to browse despite our unannounced arrival. The shop has the feel of a comfortable gentleman's club come rustic boutique, providing an agreeable space in which to browse. Amongst the racks is the odd apprentice piece, which is not quite perfect, though looked perfect to me, and sell at a much reduced price. I was taken by this apprentice reefer style jacket. Fortunately for the King, it didn't fit me, or I could have saved the bother of invoicing him and having paid for it direct as a legitimate filming expense, which it most definitely would have been. Fitment-wise, I found the jackets wore a little large on me, and would suggest contacting Aero to discuss sizing if buying online. Browsing over, we were shown round the factory, which had an air of tranquil industry. Many thanks to Dom for his time and patience on our visit. Our next destination was suggested to me by Anne when I saw her on one of my morning wanders, and what an excellent suggestion it was. Thank you, Anne.
The Scottish Borders is an easy place to get lost, and some gifted creative types are keen to find a bushel behind which they can hide their lights. One of those attention deniers was the much admired international clothing and textile designer Bernat Klein. Serbian-born Klein turned up near Selkirk during the 1950s and built a name for himself when Coco Chanel started using his designs, followed by names such as Dior, Balenciaga and, well, you get the picture. It was the swinging 60s and Klein's colourful options were in great demand. He sold out his business after a few years and created a new one, which he wanted to base near his Borders home, which had been designed for him during the 1950s by the English modernist architect Peter Womersley. In 1972, Klein's see-through studio building was complete. He could literally walk to work through the woods off the A707. His work expanded into painting, and that fed back into his textile designs. This rhapsody of concrete and glass, praised for its brutal horizontals and their relationship to the verticals of the woods around them, was one of several local landmarks designed by the equally enigmatic Womersley, including the Galashiels grandstand featured earlier in this film. Now the dilapidated Class A listed studio building, empty since before Klein's death in 2014, has been bought at auction for 15 times its guide price of £18,000, to be restored as a tribute to modernism. If you buy lottery tickets, you're helping to meet the £3 million estimated cost, as the project has been run by various organisations, architectural enthusiasts and supported by the Lottery Fund. But there won't be an opening date for quite some time.
On dropping me off at my hotel, the King asked where I was going tomorrow, and I replied I hadn't decided yet. He quickly suggested Helensburgh. I was thinking more of nipping round to his house for lunch, and so was he, which is why he suggested I visited Helensburgh, to prevent me from annoying him. As is customary on my days out from Glasgow, first stop was the cemetery. Opened in the mid-1800s, it's an archetypal Victorian cemetery, and I of course was most happy wandering and pondering amongst the gravestones. The shortest serving Prime Minister of the 20th century, Andrew Bonar Law, has a stone here. His ashes, however, are interred at Westminster Cathedral. Law served as Prime Minister from October 1922 to May 1923, when he resigned because throat cancer made him unable to speak in the House of Commons. He died 5 months after his resignation on October 30th, 1923. From the cemetery, it was off to the remains of Craigendoran Pier, adjacent to Craigendoran Station. Becoming operational in 1882, there were 2 piers of unequal length, from where steamships sailed to ports such as Dunoon and Rothsay. The pier ceased public operation in 1972, after which it served small private vessels. The piers eventually fell into disrepair, becoming unsafe, and were partially dismantled to prevent access, leaving gently decaying skeletons, and I always find beauty in decaying structures. While in contemplative mood, I rested on an East Bay located bench facing Greenock across the Clyde. Looking over a body of water gives me a feeling of opportunities in distant places and idealistic notions of exciting times in exciting locations. Fired by these thoughts of adventure, I went in search of lunch. The Gingerbread Man Cafe, with the unusual decision to concatenate bread and man instead of ginger and bread on their canopy, was where I lunched on Soup of the Day. There's a buzz to the cafe with friendly upbeat staff, and I imagine it has a regular clientele, adding to the conviviality. If you favour an atmosphere rather than just somewhere to eat, the Gingerbread Man is worth a visit. Shooting the 1987 constructed flats on the south side of Cahoon Square, which despite the structure's slender features with arcade-style ground floor shops, doesn't quite work and looks cheap, I fell into conversation with a resident of the flats. He was a Glaswegian originally from Mary Hill, relocated to Helensburgh after living in Australia for many years. He expressed contentment with his flat at Helensburgh. Continuing the fast lane naval base brought great financial benefits to the town, and when a ship was in port, the service personnel never caused any trouble on nights out. He was less sanguine about the 2022 Open Leisure Centre, which suffered extensive damage, losing almost half its roof and suffering heavy rain ingress during the January 2024 stormy Owen. At the time of my September 2025 visit, the roof, though sealed, was still unrepaired, due to arguments over who was going to pay for the repairs, according to the resident. I paused to capture this painted stone sign at 16 East Princes Street. Opened in 1875 when brother-in-laws McNure and Bryden formed a partnership, the premises sold a myriad of goods until closing in 1979. My time in Helensburgh over, I jumped on the train back to God's own city. Back in Glasgow I shot B-roll, and when finished ascended the stairs to the Jamaica Street multi-storey car park roof, which I find most cinematic when empty, as it was for my visit, and it brought to mind the multi-storey car park scene from Get Carter. Dropping my shooting bag off at the hotel, I made my way to Morrison's on Gallowgate, where you do get the meal deal discount on your points card. Returning to the hotel, I passed people queuing outside the Barrowlands ballroom. The time was 6 p.m, which seemed early to queue for a band. When I was a lad, you arrived at the venue with enough time to buy a pint, and then the band began. Fair enough, there was rarely a large crowd at the Princess Charlotte, where the M.I.G cash plan and I often attended gigs. The band deemed worth queuing for at the Barrowlands was Black Country New Road. As a respected investigating journo, I listened to a track on YouTube and found it somewhat discordant. For my final evening, a glass of lemonade was taken in the magnificent Art Deco Griffin on Bath Street. Up early for a pre-journey leg stretch on a humid morning, after which I showered and packed my detritus. It was then off to Queen Street Station for the beginning of my train ride home to the sunny south. Thank you to all the staff I encountered at the Royal Infirmary, and as always, more thanks than you can shake a stick at to the King of Glasgow for his outrageous kindness. He's a gent of the highest order, and yes, I'm still hopelessly in love with Glasgow.